Hey guys, this will be a very definition and mathematically oriented lecture, and we'll look at labour market conditions and how we work out the different numbers falling behind the government's goal of full employment. So we'll look at the labour force, the participation rate, the unemployment rate, the disguised unemployment, and hidden unemployment as basically an overview of what unemployment or the achievement of full employment actually entails. So we're going to use country alpha as a hypothetical example of a country and its labour force. So we have a population of 100,000, a population of 90,000 who are 15 years or over, 70,000 employed, 10,000 unemployed, and 10,000 underemployed. And so these are all hypothetical figures, and we're going to assume that the country alpha's Bureau of Statistics, so CABS, let's just call that, has measured from their recent survey. So in the previous lecture we defined unemployed people as those aged 15 and over who are actively looking for work but cannot find a job, and they are ready to start work immediately as soon as they find a job. And those employed as people who are 15 and over who have had a paid job for more than 1 hour per week in the past week. And so the labour force is just the sum of employed and unemployed persons. Okay, so as you can see from country alpha, we can see that the unemployed, or the employed, sorry, is 70,000 and the unemployed is 10,000. So if you add these two up, you get 80,000. So 70,000 plus 10,000 is 80,000. So the labour force for country alpha is 80,000. It's pretty straightforward analysis of what the labour force is. Secondly, we'll look at the participation rate. And this is very similar to the labour force. It is just the proportion of people over 15 years of age who are in the labour force. So we can see that before we worked out the labour force by adding the employed and the unemployed. Now we just want to find the proportion of employed and unemployed as in terms of those over 15 years old. And so we can just add this up. We just add 70,000 plus 10,000 over the total population of 15 and over, which is 90,000. And if you simplify that, you get around 0.88, and that's around 88%. So the participation rate is 88%. And the unemployment rate is a very similar idea yet again. It measures those people, or the proportion of people, unemployed. And as we can see from country alpha, we have the unemployed as being 10,000 and the labour force as being 80,000. So the unemployment rate will just be 10,000 over 80,000, and that comes to around 12.5%. If you can just use that on your calculator, 10 divided by 80 is around 12.5%. So the unemployment rate for country alpha is 12.5%, which is fairly high for a country. Now let's look at some more complex characteristics of the labour force. We're going to look at disguised unemployment first. So disguised unemployment is when an individual has a job, but is underemployed. And this comes back to the idea that sometimes people are working part-time, but they wish to earn more money, so they wish to work full-time, but they can't find a job that is full-time, so they just work 2 part-time jobs. And that's the idea of disguised unemployment. They're still counted as employed people here in the labour force survey, but they wish to work more hours, and therefore they are underutilised or underemployed to that extent. So they are not working to full capacity. So we're just going to note they are not working at full capacity. So the disguised unemployment in this case would just be here at 10,000 people because they are underemployed. Hidden unemployment is another concept where it refers to the number of individuals who would like a job. So individuals who would like a job but they are not actively seeking to work, but not actively seeking to find one. So these are people who have tried to apply for jobs over and over and over again, but they haven't been successful, and therefore they've given up on searching for a job altogether. Like, if an employer came to those hidden unemployed, they would be very willing to start a job right there and there, but they're just not. They have no incentive, or they're discouraged from actually entering the labour force, and therefore those people are actually counted in the proportion of 15-year-olds not in the labour force. So that's the extra 10,000 here, or a proportion of that 10,000 who are not actually included in the labour force, but those who wish to find a job if they had the opportunity to, but they are not actually actively seeking to find one, which is a prerequisite or a defining characteristic of those who are in the labour force. So that's the idea of hidden unemployment, and this is a very hard concept for the ABS to have to gather data from, because it is very hard to determine whether someone is hidden unemployed or whether they are just outside of the labour force. Okay, so finally we can look at the concept of the underutilisation rate. I'll rub out the unemployment rate for now. So we talked about disguised unemployment and the unemployment underutilisation. It's a very long word. Underutilisation rate. Underutilisation. So it is a rate or the proportion of those people underutilised. So remember, we noted that the unemployment rate was around 12.5%. So this is unemployment. So the underutilisation rate is basically the sum of those unemployed and those disguised. And so we can see that disguised unemployment relates back to this concept of underemployment. Those who are underutilized, or if the labour force is underutilized, is the concept that you are underemployed or unemployed. So they could be adding more work to the labour force, but they're not actually working to their full capacity. So in this case, the proportion of people underutilized, or the underutilization rate, will just be the sum of the underemployed plus the unemployed over the entire labour force. So we know that the labour force here is employed plus unemployed, which is 80,000, and those who are underemployed. And we must note that those who are underemployed actually fall under the category of employed. So this 10,000 is actually a subcategory or a subset of those employed, but they wish to work more hours. And so the underutilization rate, which we'll just make orange here, is actually, so I'll say here it is actually 10,000 plus 10,000 over 80,000. And that comes to around 25%. So the underemployed plus the unemployed over the entire labour force. So they're the labour market conditions that we have to note. It is better if, for the economy, if we have a large labour force, and therefore because we have a larger labour force, producers can pick and choose out of a more choice of labour. It is greater it is better if we have a larger participation rate. So therefore, this could ease government budgetary spending on welfare or those who require welfare because they aren't in the labour force. We also talked about the goal of full employment, where the government wants the unemployed to be only naturally unemployed, which at the moment is around 5% as per data gathered by the ABS. And we want the underutilisation rate to be as close to zero as possible. So we want everyone to be working at their full capacity. But sometimes this may not be achievable due to overarching supply side conditions. So what we have to note here is the labour force, the participation rate, how to calculate the participation rate, the disguised unemployment, what is hidden unemployment, and how to calculate the underutilisation rate.